today. So with that, I will turn this over to Chris, and Chris, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Rich, so much for doing the introduction portion there. And as Rich said, the talk I have for you today is 10 things I wish every developer knew about security. And so just for a real quick second, a little bit about me. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Security Journey, a security startup based here in Raleigh. I've been involved in the world of security for seems like a long time. Rich and I were just chatting before the session started, reminiscing about old modems and things from days gone by. But I've been involved in security. I've had a lot of different roles over my time. I've been a trusted product evaluator to a pen tester to director of incident response, traveling security consultant, and now I'm a CEO of a startup. So I've had a lot of different experience, but the last 15 years or so has been really focused on application security. So 10 years I spent at Cisco, leading Cisco's approach to security education. I'm also a co-lead of the OWASP Triangle chapter. We meet here usually near the airport in a pre-COVID world, but we've been meeting virtually. So if you have an interest in application security and you've never visited the OWASP Triangle chapter, look us up on Meetup. A couple other things about me. I do a podcast called the Application Security Podcast. I know, not a super great marketing name, but it does tell you exactly what you're going to hear if you tune into this podcast. And so I've had an opportunity to interview about 120 different people from across the world of application security over the last 7 years and ask them questions about how they get started. What are some of the cool things they've accomplished in their careers and things. And so if you want to check that out, you'll find that any place podcasts are found. And then you want to talk to me, I'm always available on Twitter. You'll find me at EdgeRoute, and you can find the podcast at AppSec Podcast. So let's kind of set the stage for where we're going in this session for today. So I want to start by talking about what I think of as the security state of the developer. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about how do we get developers more excited and pumped up about security. I've spent the last 15 years of my career have been dedicated to answering this question. So I'll share with you a little bit about what I see as the current security state. And then I'm going to go into the 10 things that I wish every developer knew. I made this list and I put it together and said, okay, if I could choose 10 things that I could impart to every developer, I'm going to walk you through that. I'll tell you what it is in the description, and then I'll give you some ideas and thoughts about how you can assess your organization to understand, do your developers understand this thing already? And then I'm going to talk about how you can build it. So if you figure out, hey, our folks don't even know about this, I'll give you some thoughts about how you could build this, how you could encourage that piece of information, that those things that we share there. And then I've always got time for Q&A. So as Rich said, put them in the Q&A portion of the webinar, and I will make sure we get answers to all of those before I leave this session today. So when I think about where we are today, it also causes me to think about the future. And so I want you to kind of go with me for a second and imagine a future world where all the developers in your company are security enlightened, meaning they understand security, they apply security, they have the knowledge, they have the experience, they have the application of it. Imagine what that world looks like. Imagine a world where the OWASP Top 10 project doesn't exist anymore. I always laugh about the OWASP Top 10. It's the most popular application security document on the planet, and yet the OWASP, the number one item on that list, hasn't changed in decades because we're still dealing with the same issues. But imagine a place where that project just ended because we didn't need it anymore. Imagine a world where there's no market for security tools because the tools we use for development just have all the security pieces built into them. Vulnerabilities disappearing, developers are security enlightened. So this is where we want to get to. This is our end state that we want to head towards. And so let's think about where we are right now for a second. And so when I think about the security state of the developer, I have to realize that one of the challenges developers face and that we all face as an industry is there are many applications that are being created, new applications. It's always happening. We're always deploying things to production, whether it's new versions of applications, whether it's new applications that people have never heard of before and we're releasing. The point is there's a lot of velocity in the world of tech. Another thing to think about is there are attackers, there are new people that wake up in every morning and say, you know what, this whole 9 to 5 working thing is just not a good thing for me. I'm going to become a cyber criminal. I'm going to become an attacker and I'm going to start breaking into applications and systems. And then the final piece of the security state of the developer and those things that influence the dev is the fact that secure coding knowledge is it's just not there. You can go to university and take a computer science degree program and never learn how to code securely. It's my favorite question to ask when I meet a college student or a recent grad. I'll say, hey, so you just finished your computer science degree. How many secure coding classes did you have? How many different classes did they focus on security? Like when you learn Java and web programming, did they talk about SQL injection? And the sad state of the world is that the answer is almost always no. And so that kind of sets the stage for where are our developers coming to us from. So if you've never seen the State of Open Source Security report from Sneak, this has some very interesting nuggets within it. And so I specifically locked in on this idea of who's responsible for security. And in general, developers consider themselves to be responsible for security. So this is a positive thing for me. I see this and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. But then one of the notes that was attached to this portion of the report said that only 3 in 10 open source maintainers consider themselves to have high security knowledge. And I thought to myself, don't we rely on open source software to drive almost everything we do in the world of tech these days? But yet only 3 out of 10 of the maintainers of open source consider themselves to have the right amount of security knowledge. So it was an eye-opening thought when I'm thinking about the world of developers and how they focus on security. Okay, here's a couple other statistics to think about. Developers are concerned, but they don't have time to focus on security. So enterprise JavaScript in 2019, they had this stat, 83% of devs are concerned about whether the open source code they use is secure. So this is good, right? Our developers are saying, we know there's a security problem in this open source that we're using. We're concerned about it. But then you put into perspective DevSecOps community survey from Sonatype, and 48% of devs say they believe security is important, but they don't have enough time to spend on it. And so all of these things together show us a picture of a world where developers, they understand that it's a problem. They just don't have the time, they don't have the resources allocated to them to be able to fix it. Where do devs go when they want to learn about security? Where do all developers go when they want to learn about security? And a quick aside here, I write some code in my world. In the early days of Security Journey, I wrote, a few lines of code here and there, and 1 or 2 of those lines might still exist in production somewhere. And so what I found as a new Ruby on Rails programmer is I kept going to Stack Overflow. Like that was always my answer when I got stuck on something. It's like, I'm going to go look in Stack Overflow. And then we hired a senior developer. And so I asked this senior developer, I'm like, you're a senior dev. You've been doing this for 12, 15 years. You don't use Stack Overflow, right? You just know the answers to how to fix things in code. And he's like, no, senior developers, we use Stack Overflow just like you do. But when we think about Stack Overflow from a security perspective, that's where we got to get a little bit scared. Okay, so 2 different studies that I found and looked closely at here about Stack Overflow. The first one, the Secure Coding Practices in Java, Challenges and Vulnerabilities, found that in some cases, an insecure suggestion by a user with a high reputation score was selected as the correct answer, as opposed to the actual correct security fix by a user with a lower reputation score. So what's happening on Stack Overflow is if someone has a high reputation score, people are assuming they understand everything about security. And what this study is showing us is that's not the case. The person that had the correct score wasn't marked as the best possible answer. And look at this other one, Stack Overflow considered harmful, the impact of copy and paste. They analyzed 1.3 Android applications that were available on the Google Play Store, and they found that 15% of them had a vulnerable code snippet that was very likely copied from Stack Overflow. So devs are going to Stack Overflow. They're asking themselves questions about what are we supposed to focus in on here? What are we trying to fix? What's our issue? What's the security challenge? They're copying and pasting code from Stack Overflow. And what this research is showing us is the code they're pasting isn't very secure. We could even go as far as to say it's insecure. And so here's my first set of conclusions for you. The first conclusion is security knowledge is low across development. Okay, we saw that. We've seen that through the perspective of the different studies and whatnot. When we think about people just going to Stack Overflow, for example, to grab answers. Security concern is serious, right? So those same devs in that other study said, we're concerned about this. But when you compare it with what the DevSecOps study said, yet they don't have the resource allocation to be able to solve the security problems. And Stack Overflow is a terrible source of security knowledge, and it's a extreme source of security vulnerability. That's what we're finding. And so when I think about the 10 things I wish every developer knew, when I was first building this talk, I thought, you know what? I could just take the easy way out here. OWASP has a document called the proactive controls. And if you're not familiar with the proactive controls, I want to make you aware of it right here, because I could have just made the proactive controls the whole topic of this talk, and I could have talked about these things for the next 45 minutes. The OWASP proactive controls is a document that is the answer to the OWASP top 10. So in the OWASP top 10, we have injection, which number 1, which focuses a lot on SQL and SQL injection. So look at C3 in the OWASP proactive controls, secure database access. That's the answer for how we prevent SQL injection when we build applications. And so I want to just draw attention to this because I want you to be aware. And if you're responsible or part of an application security program, the proactive controls is a great resource. Each of these items is like 1, 2, or 3 pages long. So this is not a 500-page document. You're not handing developers a document and saying, good luck reading all 100,000 words of these, which I know you're never going to do anything with. You're giving them a document that's concise and to the point. It helps them to solve a particular problem. How do I do access control and authorization? C7 gives you some philosophies and also some libraries for different languages, things you can do to be able to handle that. So I could have taken the easy way out here. I decided not to. I thought we'd take a higher level perspective. As you notice, OWASP proactive controls down there on the cityscape. We're flying overhead on the airplane. We're gonna take more of a 10,000 foot view look at the things I wish every developer knew. And so I'm going to show you the top 10 here, just so you can kind of get a perspective of where we're going. And then we're going to go there and we're going to look at each of these separately. Tactical usage of AppSec. GitHub's not the best secret store. You know, the second DevOps is silent. Shift left, right, everything else just start. We're going to talk about third-party and open source vulnerabilities, the value of OWASP, and a couple other soapbox style items for me, like you can't hack yourself secure. But let's go ahead and dive in. Now you've got a bit of a perspective of the entire landscape of where I'm going. Let's make our way up from number 1 all the way up to number 10. I realized I should have done this in more of a David Letterman. For those of you that remember who David Letterman is, I should have done it the other way. We should have gone 10 down to number 1 with a drum roll at the end. But you know what? I forgot I started with number 1. That's okay. We're going to work our way forward. So number 1 on my list is I wish that every developer knew that everyone is a security person, and also that the security need is pervasive. So I realize not everyone has the same security knowledge, the same experience, abilities, responsibilities. That's okay. I want to get to a world where everybody, the developers and everybody else inside a company, everybody feels a little bit of responsibility for security. And I don't think we're there yet right now. I don't think we have that shared ownership of the security problem and the security solution across the companies that we're all working for. So that's my first thing, is I want to get to I want developers to know everyone's a security person. The second one is the security need itself is pervasive. I want developers to understand we need security in everything, because developers know that where code is these days. They know about APIs and mobile apps and web apps and serverless and containers and orchestration and all of these things that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. They have a complicated world that they play in. But what I want them to know, as well as the fact that the security need is pervasive, the fact that there is no such thing as a secure development methodology. Ooh, that might have been a little controversial. There's no such thing as waterfall, agile, DevOps, Kanban, all of these things. There is no secure, you can't call any of those things a secure development methodology. Same thing with programming languages. Java, C, Python, like you can list every programming language that's out there. You're not going to convince me that any of those are secure by default. Then you've got frameworks in the web space. You've got things like Express in the Node.js world. You've got Django, Rails, Laravel, Spring, React, Vue, Angular, Embed. There's a million frameworks out there. And guess what? None of those are secure by default. So the security need is pervasive across methodology, across language that we use, and also across the frameworks. So how do we assess? So for each of these, I told you I'm going to talk about how do you assess where your company is? How do you build this thing into your program, your culture, your approach? And so if you're going to assess this idea of everyone's a security person and the need is pervasive, you first need to take the organization's security culture pulse. You got to get a feel for how serious are we about security here? And you're going to get different answers from different people. You can't just ask the executives. You can't just ask the developers. You got to get a cross section of everybody in the organization to understand how serious are we taking this? You got to get the perspective of your champions. If you have a security champions program, and everybody should at this point, if you have developers in your company, you should have a security champions program where you're pouring into those developers that stand up and say, ooh, this security thing's cool. Can I do more of it? The answer is yes. But if you don't have that group, you should build it. If you do, you need to be asking their perspectives on this as well. And look across your technology, identify where are your weak spots. We don't have the same amount of threat, the same amount of risk in all the things that we do. We have different tiers of it. And so be asking those questions about, what are the technologies we're using? Are there particular weak spots? And then the other thing you can do to assess this, to know if the security need is pervasive specifically, look at your secure development lifecycle, the process you use to build products, and make sure you have what I call a uniformity of artifact. It's a really fancy way of saying, make sure every product is going through the same process and is putting out the same documents to prove that they've taken security seriously, that security is pervasive across everything that we do. So if you don't have this and you want to build it in, so you got to start with executive buy-in. You got to get your executive team on board. And the funny thing is, in this modern age right now, I don't know of a lot of executive teams that are going to say security is not important. I lived through that world where we had to fight for everything and we had to fight to get people to take security seriously. I feel like we're not there anymore. But, if you are still in that place, ping me on the Q&A or whatever. Let me know that. I'd love to know that there are still places where that is a struggle. You got to communicate publicly about the investment you're making in security. You got to get the word out there. And then I don't know. I can't tell you how many times I walk into some big companies and I ask them the question. I'm like, so what development methodology are you using? We're using all of them. Okay. What languages are you using? Well, pretty much a little bit of everything. What frameworks? Same answer. A little bit of everything. So all we're doing there is making the ability to have security be pervasive. We're making it even more difficult by saying we're going to use every methodology, every language, every framework that's ever been invented on earth. So make sure you have, if you can, simplify those things down. Fight for that in your engineering community, because it's easier to secure a smaller set than it is to secure everything that exists on earth. So that's number one. Everyone's a security person. Security needs pervasive. The second thing I wish every developer would know is security is their ally, not their opponent. I think about it like this. The security team, we as a security team, we succeed when the developer succeeds. We have to have that partnership towards decreasing vulnerabilities. And we still have situations where developers see security people as an obstacle. And why do they do that? Very simply. Sometime in the past, a developer has come to a security person and said, oh, I'm so excited about this. I got this new idea for this feature, and we're going to do this. And you all know what the security team said to them. You all know, you're screaming it into your microphones, even though you're muted and I can't hear you right now. You know that security person said, no, you can't do that cool thing. We're going to block it. We're not going to let it happen. And you know what happened next time that developer had a good idea? Do you think they just thought, we're not going to be able to do it? You know what they did the next time? They didn't tell the security team, because the security team sucks all the fun out of what we're trying to do as developers here. And so we got to build this new world where security is an ally. There should be no more no. There should be, let's work together to collaborate and find a better solution to that's more secure, because I think that'll get us to a kind of a different perspective. And so that's where we need to go. We want security to be an ally, not an opponent. So how do we assess this? You can ask yourself, you can ask around, are developers hiding or intentionally avoiding security? Because if they've been told no a number of times, they may be doing things kind of working their way around. Once again, to that security champions program, does a champions program exist? If you have a champions program, that's building an allyship. That's an allyship between security and development. That's why security champions program exists in the first place. So if you have one, you're probably in more decent shape than someone who doesn't. And then what about security coaches? Have you ever heard of a security coach? I actually learned about this when I interviewed a guy from a big bank through the AppSec podcast. He started to tell me about this program they had called security coaches. And a security coach It's where you have a number of people available on your team that understand development, and they will go and coach individual developers through particular situations. So that coach has to have an understanding of the technology. They have to know how to code, but they also have to have an appreciation for teaching people and working with them hand in hand. And so, so you can ask that question: do you have something like that? Because if you do, you likely have a really good program of security and development allying together. So how do we build this if we don't have it? The first thing is practice developer empathy. This is my 2020, 2021. This is my stump speech. This is my one thing, that my one point I'm trying to get out to the world. Developer empathy. What is developer empathy? As security people, stop pretending that you know what developers are dealing with. If you are responsible for interacting with developers, spend a week and ask a developer, when we get back to the world of being in an office where we can all work together, ask a developer, can I sit and just can I shadow you for the week? I just want to get a feel for what you're going through. I want to get a feel for the decisions you're making as you're building software for our company. And I can tell you this, you spend a week watching what developers do and how they interact with the security things you mandate on them. It'll change your perspective. You'll have a whole new view of what you're asking people to do. Here's where this hit me in my personal kind of experience. So in building Security Journey, we have a platform that's written in Ruby on Rails, and we're always pushing code changes and things to it. And a couple, maybe 18 months, 24 months ago, I had an interesting experience happen. We were going to push a version of code out to production, and lo and behold, there was a third-party vulnerability. And I went, oh, okay, great. Our tools, they alerted us to the fact there's a third-party vulnerability. Let's go find the patch for that library. Let's put it into production. Let's put it into the code, and then we'll rerun the tests, and boom, the code will go out to production. Well, guess what? There wasn't a patch for it. So there was a known vulnerability that didn't have a patch. And in that moment, I had to go in and filter out that particular vulnerability class from my software composition analysis tool that was checking for vulnerabilities in code that was going through our DevOps pipeline. And at that moment, the light bulb went out over my head. I went, you know how many times I've told developers in the last number of years, there is no way you can filter something out of your software composition analysis tool. You can't do it. And I just reached a point where it's like, I can't push to production. I have other bug fixes, other security vulnerability fixes in this set of code I'm trying to push out. And the tool is blocking me because of this one vulnerability. And so all of the time in the past, I've told people they can't do it. And now I have to do it myself. But it opened my eyes to the fact that I need to be thinking more about what is the life of the developer. I need to practice that developer empathy. So use your champions as building inspectors and issuers of security building permits. I didn't make this up myself. I heard somebody else say it, but I'm going to just throw it out here too. He gave me permission. Deploying champions. So think of your security champions as your building inspectors and those that are helping to issue building permits for those people that are building code inside of your company. The thinking being, you're never going to have enough security people to match up the number of developers you have. I mean, maybe if you're a small company, if you got 10 developers, you got one security person that focuses on application security, rock on, right? That's a great scenario. I think you can really positively influence. But if you're a company of 2,500 developers, you're never going to have a 1 to 10 ratio of AppSec people to developers. You're more likely going to have 100 to 1. You're going to have, if you're lucky, you're going to have 10 people that are trying to influence those 2,500 developers. So you have to take your champions and you have to have them become the building inspectors that are helping you to determine, helping you to have a more far and wide reach by determining and being those that are helping you to determine if there are actual problems. And we talked about security coaches. The other thing is you want to build an allyship with your development team. Recognize when they do something cool for security. All the time we want to yell at people because they made a mistake or whatever, and there's always this negative perception. Find a way to recognize when somebody does something cool. Recognize them. Give them some type of reward for doing it. Be like, hey, that was awesome. We're so excited that you did that. That's really cool. So they get a positive touch point from security. All right, it's time for my hot button issue. If you might be listening and thinking, wow, I thought this guy had nothing but hot button issues. He seems to be getting pretty excited about all these things. But number 3, you cannot hack yourself secure. but you do have to take a risk-based approach. So here is my challenging statement. Regardless of how much effort you put into breaking a piece of software, the security of that software is no better after the engagement is complete. All the pen testing and red teaming in the world never made a piece of software, never made one line of code more secure. And as an industry, you put all of this focus on the breakers, the red team, the pen test. Ask any kid who's graduating from college right now, what do they tell you? I want to be a pen tester. I want to break stuff. And I'm here to tell you, we got lots of people to break stuff. We need more people that can build things securely. We need more of that blue team kind of perspective on the development side. And so, you know, you might be thinking, you might be sitting here thinking, I don't know, you got any evidence to back this whole thing up about, as an industry, we take pen testing as the most important thing? Matter of fact, I do. I looked on Amazon. Over a 90-day period, there were 135 books that contain the word hack in the title that were released in the computer and technology section. 135 in 90 days that were released. Guess how many had the phrase secure coding in that same 90-day period? 0. Because everybody wants to break stuff. That's what's exciting. That's what is cool. And I don't have a problem with pen testing. Don't hear me saying like pen testing doesn't matter. Of course, pen testing matters. What I'm trying to say, though, is we got to get people thinking more about the builder side, about writing secure code, about being security-focused developers. That's where I want to get. It's where I want us to be as an industry. So how do we assess this? Well, you got to first ask, how does our organization focus security? Are we very red team, pen test breaker? Is that what drives us? We're all get excited about that? Or do we have some flavor of defenders, builders of secure code? And then also, I didn't even mention before, but we want to have that risk-based approach. Like we want to instill that in our developers, the ability to determine, hey, we've got a number of different issues. What's the most important? How do we figure out which one it is? And so how do we build this? Well, we have to take a well-rounded approach. We can't just focus on building, and we can't just focus on breaking. We got to focus on all of those things together, and then bringing them together with the defender as well, bringing red team, blue team, purple into a purple team type of environment. So we got to be well-rounded. That's how we counter that. All right, number 4. OWASP is a treasure trove of security resources. If you don't know all the cool things that happen at OWASP, you're missing out. If you're trying to run an AppSec program without knowing about the cheat sheet project, dependency check, dependency track, OWASP ZAP, some of the documents I mentioned, proactive controls, everybody knows the OWASP top 10. It's famous. But what about did you know there was an OWASP API security top 10? A completely different list that focuses on API specifically. And APIs everywhere these days. We got it in everything. So that's where we have to be focusing on. My point here, though, is use the OWASP open source free resources as a way to bolster your AppSec program. There's just so many cool things out here that exist in the world of OWASP. The cheat sheets alone, if you've never heard of the cheat sheets, there are like 70 cheat sheets. And what a cheat sheet is, a collection of very knowledgeable AppSec people from all over the world take one particular issue and they write a 2 to 3 page document on it. You ever tried to securely store passwords in a database? Yeah, me too. You know, that's one of the hardest things to do. Well, there's a cheat sheet on it. Gives you 3 pages talking about things such as PBKDF2 as an algorithm to scramble those passwords before you put them in the database, and some of the constraints we need to feed into that algorithm to be able to do that well. But why try and have devs that are going to reinvent password storage in a database when there's this thing called the cheat sheets that guide you? So use OWASP, look up all those things, understand them. So you want to assess this one, ask your developers, how many of you as developers know about OWASP or use any of the OWASP projects? And then figure out, do we include these OWASP resources in our program directly? Do we have a wiki site or a web page somewhere that at least links to those and says, hey, these are cool things you should be checking out? And if you want to build this, there's a couple different things you can do. Host an OWASP top 10 lunch and learn. You can do this virtually over Zoom, whatever. And you can also do this in person just by grabbing pizza. And when we get back in the world of being in buildings where we can have pizza lunches. The nice thing about the OWASP top 10 as a lunch and learn is there's already a set of slides that OWASP has posted about this topic. And you can take one of these OWASP items and present on it in a weekly fashion, in a monthly fashion, whatever you do. It's a chance for you to teach and share some knowledge with your developers. Make sure those devs know about those cheat sheets. Priceless information there. And then look at the tools that OWASP has. Zap as a desktop-based proxy that does a little bit of dynamic application scanning. And then dependency check, which will provide that software composition analysis use case I was talking about earlier. Take these things and build them into your program. That's number 4. Number 5, probably one of the ones that is the most like you look at it and go like, yeah, pretty much everybody already agreed with that. Third-party and open source vulnerabilities are rampant. We learned that devs have a concern for the security of open source, but we got to keep looking at these numbers because we got to get better at this as an industry. And so I always look at the state of software supply chain by Sonatype, gives these numbers about the percentage of Java components that were downloaded with critical style vulnerabilities. And the reason Sonatype can tell us that is because they own Maven. They run the Maven repository that all Java devs use for downloading components. And so they have an inside track into the metrics there. But I mean, look at that. And I saw the number for 2019, I think it was 10 point something as well. So even with the latest report, not a whole lot is changing. 1 in 10 components that your devs that are programming in Java are downloading and building into their products and your applications have vulnerabilities built in. Same thing with the NPM Future of JavaScript study found that, from 2018, 11% of downloaded modules for Node had critical vulns. 51% had some type of vulnerability in it. Like, it should just blow our minds as security people. Like, how are we allowing so many vulnerabilities to migrate into the software that our teams are building? That's one of our challenges. But I wish every developer knew about this and knew the level and the depth of what this problem is. So to assess this, we got to ask the question, do we have a process, first of all, for dealing with third-party and open source vulnerabilities? If we're using DevOps, do we have a tool in our pipeline that's going to break the build if there is a known vulnerability in one of the packages somewhere that we use? And the other thing we have to ask is, what are the tool sets that our developers are using when they're building this code and putting them into these pipelines? And then if we want to build this, one thing I want everybody to realize is there's 2 different scenarios we have to be teaching our developers about. There's the easy one, the vulnerability in the known component. That's the textbook problem, textbook answer. But we're also seeing a new class of attack where an attacker will put a backdoor into an existing library. We're seeing this happening with crypto miners a lot, where an attacker will take over an old package that's no longer maintained, and they'll create a new version of that package, which may be a dependency of lots of other packages, and they'll add a crypto miner to search for Bitcoin or whatever crypto miners are doing these days. And then that library will be seen as a new version. Everybody's build systems will grab the new library. Ooh, new version, pull it in, boom, you got a crypto miner built into your production application. And so to build this, we got to deploy those software composition analysis tools, and we have to break the build. If there's any known vulnerable library, you got to break the build. You got to cause the developers, at least they may have to do what I did, filter it out temporarily if there's not a fix, but at least we're tracking it. And the way we approach that is we don't allow a filter that doesn't have a time when it expires. And so our filtering system will expire like usually 30 days. Sometimes we make them 7 days depending on the criticality of the issue. Okay, number 6. Shift left, shift right, shift outwards. Feels like we're dancing. Just start. Shift left has become all the rage in the last couple of years. It's the new, really cool term. We're going to shift left. Well, I mean, we've been shifting left since the very beginning. But a friend of mine posted on LinkedIn and said, forget the whole shift left. Let's start left. I was like, like it. That's really what I want to be doing as well. Let's start left. And so then some of the vendors that were building products that were more in the things you were adding to your production apps and they were running in production, what they ended up doing is starting this thing called start right. Or shift right. They started saying, well, it's not shift left, it's shift right, because we're going to shift into production. I'm like, you know what? Start left and start right. You know what we call that? It's called the secure development lifecycle. We've been doing it for 10 years. What's old is new again. Shift left, shift right are marketing terms. Great, love it. But let's focus on the process. Let's focus on secure development lifecycle is the way that we're going to approach this. So how do we assess this? Well, do you have a secure development lifecycle? And then you have to ask your development, your ops teams to work together to say, are we utilizing it at the percentage that we're advertising or that we think we do? Are 100% of the applications we build are you utilizing our standard approach for security? Or is it less than that? We got to assess, we got to understand that. And then, from the build perspective, you got to sell the concept of starting left and focusing on that to your engineering and release management. You have to also sell the idea of starting right to your ops folks and figure out the right tools that can help you to protect yourself in production. So that's the whole idea of shift left, shift right, shift outwards, shift up, shift down, whatever. Just start. Get out there and actually do it. Okay, here's another interesting backstory that goes with this one. The sec in DevOps is silent. You can't have a true DevOps without security integrated. And we've had this crazy conversation. It's DevSecOps, it's SecDevOps, it's SecOps with Dev, it's Dev with the side of Sec, You can't have a true DevOps, though, without having an integrated approach to security. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. His name's DJ Schleen. He's working at a big healthcare company now, but he's one of the movers and shakers in the world of DevSecOps. And he said he was actually sitting around the table the first time somebody said this term of DevSecOps, and they were all like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. We're going to use this." And now he's looking back, going, "I really wish we should have never let that term escape that table conversation, because it makes us think that DevSecOps is when we apply security to DevOps, and DevOps by itself doesn't need security. It doesn't have security built in. And we don't want that to be the approach. We want people to say DevOps always has security. That's the way we do it. So if you want to assess this, evaluate your development methodology. What are you using? Are you using Waterfail, Agile Fall, Agile DevOps? I mean, there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor there, right? Because one thing you'll find, and that I find in my travels, is I go to a company and they start talking about their methodology, and I say, "Well, what are you using for your methodology?" And they'll say, "Oh, we're using Agile." And you know what I always ask? "Yeah, what does that mean?" Because what I found is Agile in one place is not the same thing as Agile somewhere else. Same thing with DevOps. So I'm going to make the assumption that most people are trending towards this DevOps world. And so we've got to understand the different phases of our DevOps pipeline, and then make sure we have an integration of security at each step along the way. My friend DJ also introduced me to this idea of a DevSecOps unicorn. I'd never heard of this before. But if you want to build this culture of DevOps and security, you have to cross-pollinate people that have development experience, that have security experience, and operations experience. And they call them DevSecOps unicorns because they're like unicorns, like no one's ever actually seen one. Somebody that can cross over across all three of these barriers. But you can build them. You should try to build them by cross-pollinating people and trying to get people experience across all three of those disciplines, because that's when your DevOps gets super dangerous, meaning in a good way. Make sure you got the right tools and the right automation, though, to built into your existing pipelines. That's how you build this idea of DevOps with integrated security right from the beginning. So we'll spend the rest of our time pouring through this super complicated diagram. No, we won't. I wanted to share this with you, though, because this is the best example of all of the moving pieces of DevOps with integrated security that I've ever seen. So the good folks at Sonatype built this reference architecture. And the good thing is you can go to this site and you can download a copy of this reference architecture, and it's a draw.io file, which is an online kind of drawing application. And what I did the first time I looked at this, they sent it to me and I was like, this is, I'm the keep it simple person. Like, this doesn't make any sense because it's so complicated. But what you can do is you can disable all like various layers in this picture, and you can take it down to a bare setting, and you can study the bare kind of version. Then you click and add a layer to it. And when you add the layers one after another, you'll start to understand all of the complexity that's happening here, but it'll make sense because you'll understand the foundational pieces. And so if you want to understand all the pieces of DevOps with security, this is the best resource I've ever seen anywhere. And that's why I still recommend it today. All right, we're getting there. We're at number 8. GitHub is not the best secret store. Secrets should never live in your source code control system. So I wish developers had this ingrained into their brains and they were like, what do you mean we don't ever put an API key into GitHub? It's not something we ever do. But unfortunately, it still happens a number of times. And so how do we assess this? Well, we've got to do some code review. That's one way we can assess this, to say, do we have secrets? Do we have API keys that are floating around in source and configuration files? There's also a whole set of tools like GitRob, Trufflehog, Git Secrets, OWASP Sedated. These tools, their sole purpose is to search through your GitHub repos and determine, do you have passwords, keys, things like that are obvious, and help you to find them so you can have those removed from your source code. Just in case I didn't talk about this before, but if you're thinking, well, why does it matter if we keep secrets in our source code repository? Well, because you have a secret stored in your source code repository that unlocks your database that stores credit card information in production. And now we're making that available to everyone who downloads that code. Like, I mean, I trust the people I work with, but I don't trust everybody on earth. And so that's why we don't store secrets in our source code repositories, and we want to squash them anytime we do. So we want devs to know, GitHub, if you're using another source code repository, fill that in here. Source code repository is not the best secret store. And so educate people on this risk of keeping their secrets and their keys in that source code control, and then automate. If you're going to build this, automate using some of those tools. Don't try to manually search through the source code repos. You'll drive yourself insane. Use those tools and that'll search through and help you do that. So number 8, GitHub is not the best secret store. All right, we're almost to number 10, but we got to stop off first at number 9. Docker and Kubernetes are not security products. I took this one to Twitter. I was like, I'm going to get somebody on Twitter to fight with me about the fact that Docker and Kubernetes are security products. And you know what? I couldn't get anybody to take the bait. A friend of mine, Will Sargent, replied to my premise that Docker and Kubernetes are not security products. He said, they're not. They aren't. Even the Docker security lead says if you want secure Docker, you should run it in an isolated hypervisor. And then he gave me the link to the Docker security lead's presentation from a conference from a couple of years ago, where somebody asked him the question, and he had a slide to cover it, where they said, can we use Docker as a security, something for secure isolation? And the Docker security lead said, no, that's not what this thing exists for. Docker and Kubernetes are incredible technologies. Don't get me wrong. Docker is about containerization. How do we take our applications and containerize them to make them so that you can run the same container on my local development machine that runs in production? It uses the same libraries and everything else, which means if it runs on my local machine, it'll run in production in the same way. Kubernetes orchestrates all of these container executions with failover and all kinds of other things. And the point is, both of these can introduce security weaknesses into an architecture, but neither one of these is really super good at mitigating vulnerabilities. But I love them both, but they're not security products. I wish every dev knew that. And so if you want to assess this, figure out what is your reliance on these two technologies first. If you're not using them, don't go pick a fight about it. And then if you're going to build this understanding into your devs, you have to educate them on the security features that do exist in Docker and Kubernetes, because there's a lot of really cool things there. Docker has these namespaces, and a namespace allows you to have logical isolation between two particular containers. You have capabilities where you can control what is a container allowed to do at the system call level. So you can lock down what a container can do. AppArmor, SE Linux, you've got multi-level security being applied to the world of Docker containers. And then you've got Kubernetes that has security contexts where you can set security policies for particular pieces of the Kubernetes infrastructure. You've got role-based access control. You've got the same namespaces you have in Docker, similar use case. So if you want to use these technologies, make sure you're providing a guide to your users on how to use them securely for your developers. All right, number 10. I know you never thought we were going to get here, but look, we did. Number 10, tactical usage of next generation AppSec. When I think next gen AppSec, I'm thinking RASP, IAST, SCA, and CWPP. Thank you, Gartner, for another 4-letter acronym in the world of application security, because we didn't have enough between SAS, DAST, RASP, IAST, SCA is 3. CWPP. Let's start with RASP though. RASP and IAST kind of go together. RASP, runtime application self-protection. Running an agent inside of your application that is watching for attacks and blocking those attacks from the inside of the application, inside the application's runtime. This is next gen, but this is where you need to be today. IAST, interactive application security testing, same idea as RASP, except IAST is more like I run the agent in a test environment. I scan every, the application with, I throw all kinds of scanners at it, all kinds of testing, trying to trigger pieces in the application that then have vulnerabilities that I can go fix before we get to production. I see RASP and IaaS as almost the same technology. It's just production versus a test environment. And that's how I see most people use it. I've already talked about SCA, software composition analysis. It's the scanners that are going to tell us if we have vulnerabilities in our third-party code and break the build if they do. Then we've got CWPP, the Cloud Workload Protection Platform. This is an area of tool that has come onto the market to help us secure like containers, for example. So there's a number of CWPP tools that will help us to lock down our containers on top of what Docker and Kubernetes have the capabilities to do. So we can do things like check for third-party vulnerabilities in a container using an agent that is this CWPP type of tech. The other thing CWPP is doing more on the workload side is like serverless. So providing some security functionality that can interact with your serverless functions as well. So how do you assess this? Well, determine if you have any of these tools in your organization first, and then choose the tools that you want to be able to include and put into your program today. Whether that's IaaS and RASP, I think RASP and SCA are non-negotiable, like at this point. For me, for anybody that I advise and look at their applications, I'm like, if you're not using RASP, you need to be looking at that as something that's being built into your production. And it's web app specific, right? But we live in a web app world. And you've got SCA, CWPP. You got to look at these tools though and start figuring out how they fit into your approach to security. All right, here's all 10 of them together again. What I'm doing, I've done this talk live before. This would be the point where I run up next to the screen, stick my head into the shot in case you're taking a picture. We're in a virtual world. Just, it doesn't work the same. It's not the same. But I wanted you to see all 10 of these things together as kind of in a single location. So that's really the summary of all 10 of the things I just talked about. So let's say you're sitting here and you're thinking, okay, great, great information. My program is in need of a boost, and we need to educate our developers better. Here's some things I think you can do. Here's an action plan for you. Because, if we just come to conferences and all we do is listen to people talk and then we go back away and go, that was great, that person talked, but we don't take any action from it, but it's limiting our value from this experience. And I want you to go away and do something with this. And so next week, what I want you to do is review those 10 things and start to assess your organization against them. And then the first 3 months, build a plan to educate your developers on some of these topics that you find in your assessment aren't part of your security culture. And then in the 6-month time frame, add some more. So I don't want you to go and say, well, we're going to take all 10 of these and we're going to teach them next Tuesday. And everyone's going to be, done learning by Wednesday. Pick a few of them and start to try to embed them into your culture. And then at the 6-month mark, add a couple of more. If you're having some success, get some early wins, some early successes. All right, here's my key takeaways. Developers are not the problem. They're the solution, okay? Across all 10 of these things, it's not developers. Don't ever tell me that developers are the problem, because that's something I'll want to argue with you immediately, because like developers to me are not the problem. They're the solution. Security partnerships. So we have to partner with security and development together. We have to bring that unification. We have to bring that allyship where we're working together and we're focusing on the most important things. And remember, number 3, hacking's not the answer, right? You can't hack yourself secure. I got to make a t-shirt. I don't have one yet. I need to make a t-shirt that says you can't hack yourself secure. You do have to take a risk-based approach, teach your developers a risk-based approach, and also an OWASP approach by using the tools, technology, the documents that are out there. And then monitor your dependencies, adjust your process, make sure you're selecting the proper tools. We talked about a number of different tools across these 10 things. And I want you to make sure you're going back and thinking about, do we have the right tool set? And listen, I don't work for my company doesn't make any of those tools. You're hearing Chris Romeo, practitioner in the world of application security here, giving you the data dump when somebody asks me, hey, what do you think of these types of technology? All right, real quick, and then I'll jump into the question and answer section. I already see a few queued up for me here. If you want to engage with us at Security Journey, the podcast I mentioned already a few times, but that's a good way to learn more about us. We do a newsletter usually every 2 weeks or so. I collect a bunch of articles. I, like you, read a lot of different sources of articles. I give you a summary of the 5 articles I think that are worth your time. And then I also sometimes add a little bit of snark in my analysis of those articles. It's fun. It's an outlet for me. There's my email. You want to get in touch. There's how to find me on social media. Again, Edge Router and AppSec podcast. So I'm going to go to the queue of questions here. All right. So they said, do this, do that. Okay. I'm sorry. I lost the context on the first one, Philomena. I didn't, it's probably something that was in the context of something else I was saying. Okay. Next one says, how do you build a secure proof of concept environment that is able to be effective in a large enterprise like a big bank? Big bank. That was a good clue right there. I was not tracking until I saw that key there, that big bank, given they have to test. So how do you build a secure proof of concept environment that is able to be effective in a large enterprise like a big bank? Well, I mean, I think when I think of that environment, I know the key idea that there's a big bank. And so banks tend to be slow in their adoption of new ideas, new technologies, new techniques and things. And so I think that I think one of the keys to success there is first of all, is getting early successes, right? It's building a new approach to security in a pipeline that doesn't have 117 moving pieces, right? Keep it simple. I live my life according to that principle, but I also recommend it from an AppSec and technology perspective. Keep it simple. If you want to have success, you're going to have to demonstrate that approach to building software using perhaps DevOps and with a little bit of security together, you're going to have to prove that that's better than the way that we're doing it before. You're going to have to provide a way for that environment to be tested and scrutinized and everything else. And so that's what I would say is keep it simple, use a DevOps pipeline, build 1 or 2 security capabilities into it, whether it's static application scanning that's happening at code check-in, whether it is software composition analysis, and then start simple and then build on top of it. All right. So next question was, how would you suggest a developer uses what would you suggest a developer uses besides Stack Overflow? Or what would be a safer way to use the website in general? Okay, great question. So my perspective is going to be OWASP, like I mentioned there with my number 4 on the list. And so I want my developers to go to the OWASP cheat sheets as the OWASP proactive controls, which is very high level in talking about things like secure database access, authentication, authorization, basic stuff, but also at a level of depth that they're going to be able to be successful with there. So I'm going to say OWASP proactive controls plus the cheat sheets it is a good website style resource for dealing with these things. And I'm just nervous with Stack Overflow that if developers are looking at a Stack Overflow solution and they're making a security decision based upon it, that I think there's some danger there. I mean, if you really want to do something with Stack Overflow, you could set up something where you're through a coaching relationship or whatever, you're interacting with developers and they're looking at things coming out of Stack Overflow and they're bringing it to the security team to just say, hey, can we collaborate on this? Like, we're not so sure about how secure these things are that are coming out of Stack Overflow. So it might be an opportunity for collaboration, interaction, stuff like that. All right. I don't see any other questions floating around right now. So
yeah. Hey, Chris, there's one more. It says a comment or gatekeeper instead of PSP.
Once again, I don't remember the context of that. I was probably full on in the zone and I don't remember what the context of that was, but
alrighty, Chris, we have a couple of other questions in the chat section.
Okay. I'm jumping
Actually,
right now.
I think it just opened up in the question and answer.
Awesome. Let me look at this. I just found a whole bunch more. All right. Awesome.
So the first one looks like it's from Edward Callis.
Yep, he copied it back. He
put it back in the Q&A section.
Let's deal with that one here. Deal with that one first. Okay. If application pen testing isn't an effective measure, then how do we measure the effectiveness of our secure development program? Third-party SAST. I'm not a coder. I don't know how to objectively ensure developers are doing the right thing. Okay. Oh, Edward, awesome question. Love it. Love the way you're thinking. How are we going to measure this thing? Because if you can't measure it, you can't tell if there was an improvement, right? And so when I think about measuring application security success, there's a number of different things we have to do. It's a number of different metrics coming together. And so I'm not going to say like application pen testing is fine as a data point. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to say, well, we did an application pen test. There were no significant findings. So, woohoo, we're secure. Okay. That's one data point. It's not a bad data point. Like people sometimes hear me talk about this topic and say, well, this guy he hates pen testing. He doesn't. No, not at all. I think it's very valuable. I don't think it's the only thing we want to focus on. So yeah, what I want you to do is I want you to think about like, what are multiple metrics that we can use? So pen testing can be one. You mentioned third-party SaaS, static application security testing. Great metric that you can use and great tool that you can integrate and start to think about is what are the bulk metrics that are coming out of that? What is our SaaS tool finding when it's scanning? Meaning, what are the number of findings? What are the criticality of those findings? Bring all of those things out together. Another thing you should be doing from measuring the overall success of your program is you got to have security requirements that are being driven into your applications, into the things that you're building. And so you should be measuring what is our overall success, what is our rate of meeting those requirements on an application by application basis. So that's another metric. So the point is like we gotta have lots of different metrics. I mean, software composition analysis. How often are we finding and detecting problems in third-party software and squashing those? Another thing you should be looking at is, from an education perspective, like everybody should have an educational program for application security inside their companies. And so one thing you can do is measure how far have people gone into that learning process? How much knowledge have they brought in? And so, Edward, once again, great question. I think you got to bring all these things together. You got to be thinking about all kinds of different metrics there. So let's see. I'm just checking.
Chris, there's one more. It says, can you, in the chat sections, one amen on the apply side, but that's just general comment. But can you share the link to the OWASP presentation template you mentioned for potential want to learn so we can learn from the host?
I don't have the link handy, but I'll just kind of verbally tell you where to find it. So if you go to the OWASP website and you search for the OWASP top 10, it'll take you to a specific page for that project. And one of the links on the right-hand side will be to that presentation that folks have created over the years to describe that. The other thing I say is if you go and you can't find it for whatever reason, my contact information is on the screen here. Ping me. I will be happy to make sure you get a pointer to that directly. I don't know what the link is off the top of my head, but hopefully you can get there from that particular spot. So I don't see anything else, Rich, in the queue.
No, I don't see any other questions or any other chats. Chris, I want to echo one of the comments here is excellent presentation. Great to have a high energy speaker at the last session. I tell you, you kept us all awake and going excited about how we can secure our code. So thank you so much. Any other last comments?
Yeah, thanks for such an awesome audience to have this many folks here at the end of the day. I love it. So
yes,
hope you had a great time at InfoSeCon, and hopefully next year we'll be in person again. So everybody have a great rest of your weekend.
All right, couple